thank you for joining us once more for one of our Wet Spotlights, our feature where we take an in-depth look at some of the wonderful aquatic life that we see on almost a daily basis. This week we'll be focusing on one of the largest species of checkerboard cichlids, Crenicara punctulatum. First things first, of course it wouldn't be a really in-depth look if we didn't first examine how we got here, why we have this fish described as such. As I mentioned, the scientific name for this fish is Crenicara punctulatum. It's a cichlid in the order Cichliformes, and in the family within that of Cichlidae. Go figure. Crenicara, of course, being derived from creni, being short for crenulatus, which means roughly cut or clipped, which is presumably referring to, and here's $1 million term, the denticulated pre-operculum of this fish. Denticulated meaning, of course, that it has tooth-like projections, and the pre-operculum referring to the bone right before the operculum, which is, simply put, kind of like a fish's cheekbone, where the gill plate would be. Acara, of course, refers to kind of a similar body shape, oval and compressed, for the Acara genus. It's kind of like a hanger-on for that. There are many cichlids with the suffix Acara in the genus. Punctulata, or more correctly punctulatum, I say more correctly because that's what the catalog of fishes has it designated at. I'm not quite good enough at Latin to figure out why it's that as opposed to punctulata. But anyway, it is the diminutive of punctum, which is in Latin would mean spotted or dotted, presumably referring to the many brown spots on the side of the head. Of course, this cichlid is very, very unique, and many in the genus are very similar to this. This fish in particular, and again, I continue referring to it as either Crenicara punctulatum or the checkerboard cichlid, which doesn't really do it as much justice. There's a lot of checkerboard cichlids, frankly, but anyway, it practices what is called protigenous hermaphroditism, which means that this fish, like many other organisms, will be all born female, and as they age, the most dominant member of the group will transform into a male. So for those of you that watched Finding Nemo, kind of the reverse there, where they're all born male and then the large ones become the females, which does mean that when they're small, when they arrive, oftentimes into retail shops, sexing them is very easy to start because, surprise, they're all female. Nice and convenient there, you just gotta get a group and wait. This species in general is quite large for a checkerboard cichlid. Males will reach about 4 inches or so, especially with some of their filaments. Females will end up being just a little smaller, but they are going to be still fairly stout for a dwarf cichlid species. Females are most easily identified once they're older by having shorter fins, by having rounder fins, primarily with the dorsal fins and anal fins, and will have this really nice kind of orange glow to their pelvic and anal fins, which is, in my opinion, quite attractive. Males will eventually lose, as they transition, those signature fins, the orange on the pelvic fins, and will get more of that filament to the dorsal and anal fins, and they will get this very attractive iridescent blue. I've seen some photos in some of the, if I'm remembering rightly, the aqualogs, where the males have this beautiful kind of whitish blue piping on them that's very attractive. Unfortunately, we don't know everything about the exact mechanics of that change, just for the reason that this fish is not particularly common in nature, and due to the fact that it's not tremendously striking, although I would say it's handsome, not always imported for the aquarium hobby, and of course our hobbyist studies as well. Crenicara punctulatum is found throughout the Amazon and Essequibo River basins. That Essequibo particularly is in Ecuador. but it can also be found in Peru, Colombia, and Brazil. So it does have a fairly wide distribution. Just as I mentioned, it's not particularly common in any one spot. They do commonly inhabit forest creeks or sandy river shores, often among a bunch of fallen leaves or amongst plants. In our experience keeping them, we do find that this species thrives best in a well-planted tank with softer water that contains a lot of hiding spots and finer sand if possible. This fish is commonly found in acidic water in the wild with a pH around 5 or 6. We had lots of luck keeping them at a more neutral 7.0, though if you do intend to breed or bring out the best possible colors, it would be a good idea to, of course, have a stable yet lowered pH of around that 5.5 mark. They typically would inhabit somewhat warmer waters. Anywhere from 73 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit would be totally fine in the aquarium, and they're typically fine even in the higher registers of that. In captivity, they're best off in larger community tanks, especially in groups. We do recommend having a footprint of at least 3 to 4 feet, so tanks commonly found of 40 or 55 gallons would be wonderful. We found this fish to be tremendously peaceful for a cichlid, and we've had luck keeping them with plenty of community fish without any issues. They are very, very social in the wild, so we would recommend keeping them in a group of preferably 6 or more. The more the merrier, really, so long as you have the space for it, with plenty of dithers like you can see here to make them feel safe. They can be a little skittish without the presence of smaller fish to show them that it's safe. Some good bets for tank mates would include Ancestris claro, Copella arnoldi, one of the splash tetras, Nanostomus marginatus, the dwarf pencilfish, Hyphesibricon herbertaxelrodi, the black neon, and Parachirodon simulans, the green neon. We found that for feeding, it's not particularly hard to get these guys to eat a wide variety of foods, although when they are first imported, and they are pretty much always imported, very, very few people keep and breed this fish, we do have to start them off on a bit of frozen food here and there to kind of get their appetites up before we start training them onto flake, pellet, or granule. Good foodstuffs would include a bit of vegetable matter here and there, and then things like brine shrimp or bloodworms. I think that in summation, this is a really neat fish that you just don't see very often, and I think unfortunately it's due to the fact that it's a little larger than some checkerboard cichlids, and it may not be quite as brightly colored, but I think therein lies the intrigue. It's a fish that not many people know about. Many people that know about it may not even care about it, but if you do have the space for something a little bigger in your community tank and you're looking for a group of dwarf cichlids, why not these? They're fascinating, I think. They've got an interesting life history, they're rarely seen, and they're just a neat little cichlid. As always, thank you for tuning in and joining us for another Wet Spotlight. As always, all the fish featured can be found either here in store at the Wet Spot or online at our stock list at wetspottropicalfish.com. Thanks again for viewing, and happy fish keeping.